Hey, what's up, folks? This is going to be a longer one because I've had this asked quite a bit when it comes to the relationship between Lionel Scaloni and Chiqui Tapia, the president of the Argentine Football Association. There's lots of stories that come out every single day about how eroded the relationship is, about whether Scaloni will return, whether Scaloni will be coming back, if he's coming back, if he's not coming back, under what conditions, under what not conditions he's not coming back. It's a very convoluted situation, which tends to be the norm when it comes to Argentine football. There are, first of all, two things that one has to keep in mind. One thing is AFA when it comes to the national team. Another thing is AFA when it comes to the league. Keep in mind, it's a rarity to see the FA, the actual FA itself, run the league directly. There's usually an entity, let's say, I don't know, the Premier League. There is a Premier League that runs it. The FA, of course, is the one that kind of oversees it. It's not the one that directly runs it, if you kind of catch my drift. There are entities. MLS in the United States runs their league, of course, overseen by U.S. Soccer. U.S. Soccer doesn't run MLS. MLS runs the league itself. If you kind of are understanding, Liga MX in Mexico runs the Mexican First Division, overseen, of course, by the Mexican Football Federation. Of course, you can give a lot of examples when it comes to that. One thing is a national team, one thing is league. And the league, if you look at it from the Argentine perspective on out, it ends up being an operation that many are complaining about based on the amount of teams that there are. Right now, there's 28 teams, and the possibility of more always ends up being there. And when you start looking at some of the teams that come in, some don't have the infrastructure to be considered a first division team. Some end up not being a financially feasible option to be in the first division. But again, the way that they vote in Argentina ends up helping out many of those teams get to the first division, and all of a sudden when they get there, there's a lot of issues that are enduring, and a lot of that has to do with Chiqui Tapia. Understand where Chiqui Tapia comes from. He comes from a second division side. He ends up coming from lower division football to take the helm in the Argentine Football Association, and eventually his team, Barracas Central, ends up going up to the first division, and it's a team that didn't have the infrastructure from a stadium standpoint. It didn't have the logistics to be able to handle a first division schedule, which eventually it ended up doing so. And if you look at teams, and this might be something for a new episode or a new video to delve into, the infrastructure that some of the teams have that ended up not really working out. Again, this is just one of many fronts that you start looking at the relationship between Scaloni and Chiqui Tapia. And like I said, one thing is the way that the league is run. Another thing is how the Argentine national team is being run. The Argentine national team ends up being the cash cow for Argentine football, basically. The brand that is the national team, the brand that is Leo Messi, alongside the brand that is the Argentine national team, even at 36, he'll be 37 in June. But Argentina right now is the most attractive football brand in the world. Maybe you'll disagree, and if you do, that's completely fine. But if it isn't the most, it is up there amongst one of the most attractive football brands in the world in actuality. So when you have a president that is managing that a lot better, the windfall of cash that's coming into the coffers of the Argentine Football Association, well, what's one of the first things many start looking to? Saying, well, maybe we should start delving into the possibility of reinvesting that into clubs or reinvesting that into the development of players, better infrastructure for players, VAR, which is something that is constantly talked about, and we talk about it when we're doing Argentine football commentary. to improve the technology that's being used for VAR, and why not? Maybe even be ambitious enough to talk about the possibility of using goal line technology, although that is something that is a very steep price. Only I think 5 or 6 leagues worldwide have the possibility of using or implementing goal line technology. The Premier League up there, the Bundesliga as well. So you kind of get the drift as far as which are the leagues that use it and which are the leagues that can use it or have the budget to use it. Again, I'm being ambitious here when it comes to it, but if the windfall, if the money, if the profit, if the surplus is there, why not look into it? I mean, maybe I'm wrong on that one, but why not? So that money is kind of being put elsewhere and it's not being used. Now, you understand why the clubs are so upset as to why the national team ends up being the darling of Tapia. But at the same time, you see that there's a need for money to be reinvested. But at the same time, say, do I want to be able to reinvest this money and maybe not even see any time? Now, when I talk about return, it's improvement. I'm not talking about return as I invest and I expect something back or, a return on investment. No, it's not going to happen there. It's the return on investment would end up being just teams being in a better financial status. And by that, meaning that they have clear debts, that there are less problems when it comes to salaries, when you see improvement of pitches and conditions and logistics and things of that nature. So that's the one thing. The look of the national team from the outside looking in is that it's, wow, this is marvelous. Look at what they've been able to do. The world champions, the team that has some of the best players in the world. Look at some of the players that are being developed, and look at the ones that are being able to succeed in European leagues or in the top leagues in the world. That's a different perspective. You see Tapia when he comes to the United States, how he's hailed as a genius, how you see a lot of publications now looking at the Argentine national team as a tremendous business, as a tremendous brand, as many of things like that. He's hailed while he goes to Argentina and he ends up being the target of criticism because the league is not working properly. The league is not competing the way it should be, and the league is not competing at the level that it should be compared to Brazil, because Brazil right now is the standard bearer. They are the standard for which South American football is judged at the highest level. But there's an economic issue as well. But again, I don't want to get into the economics part. I'm not an economist. But understanding that Argentina's economy is way behind, lagging way behind compared to Brazil's, that should give you enough of an indication as to why teams are kind of not on par from a financial standpoint. There's that. There's the perspective from one end, the perspective on the other. Now, when you start looking internally, there's a lot of factors that Lionel Scaloni wants to have changed. First and foremost, hey, by the way, I need to get more. I need more. I need more in terms of what I've become as a coach, what I'm looking to do. Now, keep in mind that the toughest work that Lionel Scaloni is going to have is this year. Or when I mean this year, I mean 2024. He will have to go and say so long to many players that truly helped him along the way. He's going to have to start changing over certain players. Now, this is natural, but you as a leader of men, you end up finding yourself in a precarious situation when all of a sudden some of the more emblematic figures that have helped you to prominence, all of a sudden you have to usher them out for a younger group, for a younger generation of player, for a different player, because if you don't evolve, if you don't grow, you die from a footballing standpoint. If you don't evolve and keep growing and keep evolving, or if you don't evolve and keep growing, the team ends up being less competitive. And the point is to continue the competitive or maintaining a certain level of competitiveness. Lionel Scaloni doesn't want to be a part of that to a certain extent. It's a very difficult decision. Who do I take out? Who do I bring in? Is the player that's waiting in the wings better than the one that's there? You start looking at, the biggest possibility of all And the most obvious possible. Let me start with the most obvious. The most obvious number one is Angel Di Maria leaving. He'll be leaving the national team after the Copa America. So who do you start looking at? Nico Gonzalez. When you look at it from that perspective, it's a tough decision to make when it's a player that's starting to, have a bit of a downturn in terms of productivity. Let's use at a club from a club perspective. Enzo Fernandez, who's had some troubles in ever since he's come over to Chelsea. He's had good moments. He's had not so good moments, but they've been more not so than really good. Where do you start putting him? Where do you start putting Leo Messi at 37? Where do you start putting him? Now, that's going to be a deeper conversation because it's more Messi already admitting that has to start changing his role a little bit, and the team can't depend on him so much. But it's also, okay, who comes in and fills that position, who fills that void? And that's not something that you end up being comfortable. You don't want to look at the person in the eye and say, no, I no longer need you, or I no longer need you for that. That's where that particular little avenue ends up being complicated, and that'll be growing throughout the next few months. We'll see it a lot in March when newer players, the Alejandro Garnachos, get more protagonism, Matias Solis, etc., end up getting some playing time during that international date and a couple of matches before Copa America. Now, also keep in mind, there is a certain amount of wear and tear that coaches go through. Lionel Scaloni is not the exception to the rule. Yeah, he's a national team coach, but he still has certain commitments that he has to fulfill, which do end up wearing him down. He's been in the United States for the past week or so. He's looking at venues to have Argentina train, and it ends up being that he has to go on into those responsibilities. But not only that's the commercial responsibilities, it's the interviews, it's the media obligations, it's the speaking engagements, it's the meeting up with players, it's the meeting up with coaching staff, it's the flying from his home in Mallorca to Argentina to be able to prepare for international dates and for call-up lists and things of that nature. Again, as an aside, that's his only job. Now, when you look at Fernando Diniz, who was coaching Brazil and Fluminense at the same time, imagine how that was going. Let me just close that bit of that kind of side thought. When you have such commercial obligations where you're also shooting commercials, where you're also, like I said, involved in speaking engagement, it's not just the X's and O's on the pitch and who's going to play here, who's going to play there. It's everything else that the national team incurs. He also is having some personal issues. I don't want to delve into it too much. That he's had his parents have had some health issues over an extended period of time, so that also wears down, like it wears all of us down. Many of us who've had to deal with a family member or a friend or a significant other who's had to deal with not the best health or declining health or maybe a little bit more advanced in that stage of life, that wears down on you. In addition to all the other things that I've mentioned before and all the things that I'm going to mention as well. So make sure you're subscribing, make sure you're liking, make sure you're kind of doing, smashing that. And look, it wears you down. We're all humans at the end of the day. And those types of things, the personal matters do end up causing a lot of problems. That's why you see Scaloni living in Mallorca, not in Argentina. It's away from the focus. It's away from the bullseyes and all the targets and all the criticisms. He's able to isolate himself over in Spain. Now, he's also mentioned at some point that he wanted to be the Spanish national team manager. We'll see how that ends up playing out. Now, I'm not saying it won't happen. I'm just saying that it's difficult to happen as of right now. There's another issue that one has to delve into. I don't know of any country or any footballing nation in the world that is as political as Argentina. Very few. If you disagree, tell me which one and give me the reason why. But I don't know of one. Rarely have we ever seen the president of Real Madrid end up becoming the president or the prime minister of Spain. Rarely have we ever seen the owner of Manchester United become the prime minister of England or of the United Kingdom or of Great Britain. You kind of get the picture. So I mean, giving you those examples, I don't know, the owner of Liverpool becoming the mayor of Liverpool. You catch my drift? Well, in Argentina, that's happened quite often. The former president of Boca Juniors ends up being the mayor of Buenos Aires, and in turn, he ends up becoming the president of Argentina. I'm talking about Mauricio Macri. The now president of Independiente is also, a mayor of a municipality. Another former president of Independiente happened to be the leader of the largest workers' union in all of Argentina. Hugo Moyano was the president. He was the head of the truckers' union in Argentina. Rodolfo D'Onofrio is the former president of River Plate. Now he's looking to get into a political position within the government right now in Argentina. The actual president of River Plate, Jorge Brito, who also is the president of one of the biggest banks of Argentina, is also looking to get into a political position as soon as his time at River is over. So you understand what I'm saying? In Argentina, it's not only that you as a footballer end up using the Argentine League as a trampoline to go to Europe or anywhere else for that matter. You also end up seeing many use Argentine football as a trampoline from a political standpoint to brighter and bigger things, I guess you would say. Maybe. Rarely do you end up seeing a team end up being part of a political agenda or a political platform. Maybe I'm exaggerating a bit on the platform part, but it ends up being a topic of conversation. Why? Because in the last presidential elections in Argentina, one of the biggest topics that was talked about was privatization. The anonymous societies that are called in Argentina. Now, keep in mind, it ends up being kind of a privatization of clubs that they were talking about in Argentine football. That's where you end up seeing Boca and River and many clubs in Argentine football stand against it, apparently. For those of you that are familiar with Barcelona and Real Madrid, they elect. There's a club that elects their leaders, the president, the board, etc. In the United States, let's give the example in Major League Soccer. It's a franchise that a group of investors go in and they say, "Hey, I want this amount of money to be able to play in this league." That's how they structure. So it's same thing in the NFL and in the NBA. It's how American sports are basically run. In Argentina, that's not the case. Teams are not franchises. Teams are social clubs. They are non-profit entities that ended up having professionalized teams. So the objective is to have a nonprofit run a professionalized sports entity, and that ends up being kind of how football ended up growing in the clubs in various neighborhoods in Buenos Aires and throughout the country. And it ends up being that it has gotten or the necessity for professionalization is so great from a perspective. The teams run such budgets, and keep in mind, you probably could associate it a little bit more to collegiate sports in the United States than more professionalized franchises in North American sports, if you come to think of it, because there's the football team that goes and basically funds a good portion of the social clubs and the outreach and the activities and all the different sporting participative sports that are part of different clubs in that club. Boca, for example, has not only football, they have basketball, they have field hockey, they have swimming, they have a bunch of other clubs. River, another one, I'll give you an example. River have not only football. They have field hockey. They have volleyball and basketball, and not only that, River have a school that many thousands and thousands of children go to River School to go be educated. So keep in mind, it's Inter Miami having a school and different teams of different sports and different disciplines in addition to that. But again, they're a nonprofit organization, and they also have to manage a professional football club that also generates money. So again, not to side, that ends up being the issue in Argentina: the politicization of football in the country, and how it ends up impacting and ends up affecting, because you end up being very identified with your neighborhood. You end up being very identified with your club. Your club is what your lifeblood to a certain extent. Many say, hey, you can change your family, you can change your wife, but you can never change your club. And what they mean by club, they don't mean just your football team. They mean the club that you've gone to since you were a kid, where you've created a lot of friendships, where you've dealt with a great deal of life lessons. Some clubs are culture in terms of Argentine football, so it's something that needs to be understood as well. The privatization ends up taking the voice away from the voter, from the person, from the individuals that are now susceptible to whatever whims are from the investors to go and take players and bring players and end programs and start programs, or be able to just eradicate everything and just focus on one thing, and that's it. And you watch from the sidelines and you can absolutely do nothing about it. That ends up being the issue. Now, whether you're against it or for it, that's another topic of conversation. It ends up becoming a very politicized issue because in Boca, for example, the elections were basically held up until just, of course, the time that we're recording, yesterday. They finally decided to have the elections on December 17th. So that ends up being, hey, with Juan Román Riquelme saying the other day, look, if we allow these people, Mauricio Macri and many of the people that are in favor of privatization, you will no longer have a club. And that ends up hitting, really deep in many cases. How does that affect Lionel Scaloni? Well, football ends up being the pawn piece in all of this. The picture with Leo Messi, mind you, many journalists I've seen in recent months, that's the reason why they're there, to get the picture with Messi. He could be all the way back there. As long as my face is there and I'm taking the selfie and he's somewhere in the vicinity of that photo, that's good enough for me. That's what many journalists want. That's what many investors want. That's what many are looking to do. Many politicians, especially politicians, I should say, they're looking for that photo with Messi. They're looking for that photo with Paulo Dybala or whatever player from the national team is there. That's what they want, because that gives them a political leverage when it comes to an agenda. Oh, people automatically say, oh, he took a picture with so-and-so must be affiliated with that politician or that entrepreneur or that journalist. So you end up using players as pawn pieces when it comes to certain agendas. Lionel Scaloni did not want that. He wanted basically all those interests to stay away. I mean, he's basically saying the Argentine national team is not a lobbying group. It's not someone that you could come in at a whim and because you want a certain cause to prevail, to use us as those spokespeople. Now, keep in mind that you have to watch what you say when you're in the Argentine national team. Reasons why when you see Leo Messi go to Juan Román Riquelme's tribute, he doesn't put on Boca's jersey because he knows what that entails. He doesn't put on Newell's jersey, although, he's born and bred Newell's, because he knows what that entails. He doesn't want to cause any controversy. He doesn't want to cause... He's trying to, he's trying to navigate the waters as best as possible. Okay? There's a reason why when Angel Di Maria went to Maxi Rodriguez's tribute, he didn't put on the Newell's jersey. We know the obvious reasons why. It's that, the navigating of the waters for loyalties, for political favors, for political edges. That's what ends up happening. at one point, I believe it was the match against Uruguay. There was an official band that an armband that many politicians wanted, and even Chiqui Tapia wanted. The Argentine national. It was basically saying that we are against anonymous societies, the SADs, as they say in Spanish. That ends up being a major issue. That ends up being a major problem when it comes to Chiqui Tapia not having that. Because keep in mind, Chiqui Tapia not only is an executive, a director, an administrator of a footballing entity or a sporting entity, he also ends up supporting Sergio Massa, who ends up being the other political candidate that ends up losing in the elections, openly supporting him, and ends up being on the losing side. So obviously, if you end up being on the losing side, you also have to end up kind of suffering whatever consequences or collateral damage do end up coming your way. And many are thinking that he's maybe on the way out because of who he supported politically. There's a lot of intricacies and complications and dramas that are going on between him and Scaloni. As I said, the relationship is a bit worn, although there's been an effort to try and how should I say, to try and iron out certain differences, iron out certain things that Scaloni really doesn't like how AFA is being run. And obviously, as I mentioned before, making players so political is one of the big problems that he has seen, because the national team is not supposed to divide. It's supposed more to unite. And if you start doing that, then the objectives of many and many agendas of many end up prevailing and end up surfacing a bit more. So that's where Scaloni ends up drawing the line. That and the way the team is run and the logistics that are established and many other things that you can talk about. Like I said, I told you, this was going to be a long video, and there's so many details to delve into when it comes to this. It's a fascinating story because, as I said in a previous video, you have to be in a position mentally where you must be fried to go in one of the biggest moments, one of the bigger wins of your career, one of the statement wins of your career. And I say it because Brazil at Maracanã, the second time around, is historic. Nobody had ever done it once. Imagine doing it twice and doing it back to back. So it ends up being a huge win for Lionel Scaloni in his career. And for you to go and say that at that moment in the press conference, it ends up putting a huge damper. And again, it starts putting Argentine football in a huge tailspin. How long will it last? We shall see. But then again, like I always say, there's always drama in Argentine football.